Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and it is time for part 4 of my vinyl collection overview, review, whatever you want to call it. I've been recording several of these parts today. My voice is going a little bit, so this will be the last one that I record in this session, so different shirt next time, probably. In any case, let's just get cracking right on into it. The last 2 videos, I was mostly talking about really 3 different bands. Beach Boys, Beatles, and the Bee Gees made up most of the last 2 videos, which I'm sure compelled very many people. Probably actually did, but we have more diversity this time around. A wider variety of artists and potentially of genres. So again, good opportunity to remind people. Number one, obviously, I try to diversify my collection as much as I can. I usually try to get records that I am familiar with from artists and bands who I like, but sometimes I do buy ones for artists and bands that I don't know anything about. So some of these I haven't heard before. I don't actually remember if any of these records I've heard before or I haven't heard before, so we'll find out. Starting off with a Stone Cold classic, actually not an album that I enjoyed all that much when I first heard it, but maybe upon revisiting it, I will. Harry Belafonte's Calypso. Just get you to stare at Mr. Belafonte's face for a second there. Rest in peace, first off. Passed away pretty recently here. I have not yet clicked with Calypso music, just in general as a genre. So that's on me. That's on me needing to do more research, I think, and really familiarize myself with it. But a lot of respect for what this album kind of represents as far as like a cultural shift in popular music, and what Belafonte represents really just as again, like Joan Baez, kind of an interpreter of folk songs, an ardent civil rights activist, and really just kind of a trailblazer on so many different levels. It's kind of, I suppose in a way, while it's nice that he still has a song that is remembered in the way that the Banana Boat song is, I guess it's a little bit sad that his legacy is just connected to this one kind of almost childish sing-along track. But there's other good stuff on here too. Jamaica Farewell, Man Smart, Woman Smarter. I'm not going to pretend like I understand Calypso. Again, part of why I gave that discretion at the beginning here. There's a lot that I'm familiarizing myself with, a lot that I'm educating myself on. That's the point of this channel. So Belafonte has not clicked yet from a musical standpoint, but impossible not to respect what he has done. And that's the only album I've heard of him, actually. So if I tried to explore some of his more strictly folk-oriented records, maybe that'll be a good gateway for me to then get into the Calypso side as well. Time will tell. We shall see. Tony Bennett. I have a few Tony Bennett albums. Very happy to be filming this video while he is still with us. Obviously ill with Alzheimer's currently. This is Tony, kind of sort of self-titled record. One of his better ones. I've heard quite a few Tony Bennett albums, actually. And I prefer, the thing with Bennett, compared to a lot of other crooners, is he has a better voice than just about any of them. He was trained in a very classical style of singing that people like Sinatra and Crosby really weren't. Bennett, the style of singing he does is almost like, it borders on operatic. I think he did get some level of formal operatic training, and the result is he projects incredibly well. His vibrato is super bright, and he's a tenor. I mean, you don't get a whole lot of really brilliant tenors singing this kind of vocal pop music. Usually it's more baritones like Sinatra, Dean Martin, people like that. So Bennett really stands on his own, and the power and the just he does so many amazing things vocally. So it's a treat to listen to him sing. So even the least interesting of his albums from a musical level are still enjoyable because you get to hear him sing with that inimitable tone, power, charisma. Boulevard of Broken Dreams and Without a Song. Probably the highlights on that one. His most famous album, along with his most famous song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco, from 62. Title track is obviously fantastic. And really, there's a lot of great stuff. I would say the first side a little bit stronger than the second side. My personal favorite is the closing track of side one, Taking a Chance on Love, which I think is maybe the best vocal that he ever put to tape. If you have not heard that one, give it a listen. Even if it's not as immediate or as emotionally moving as some of his other vocals, it is, I think, technically the most impressive thing he's ever done. He goes up to that high C at the end, which is just absolutely like earth-shattering. It's so good. And then, one other Tony Bennett album that I have. This one I actually haven't heard. It's Tony Bennett's Something from 69? No, 1970, 71, I think, because it has the Long and Winding Road on it. Again, like a lot of these pop singers were doing, you can kind of see the transition from Great American Songbook standards and things like that to performing popular songs. So, I mean, on this album, the first two songs are Beatles songs. Which obviously kind of, I think, was a gesture of submission at that point from people like Bennett, Crosby, Sinatra to an extent. It's their way of saying, okay, yeah, these new folks have won. We're just going to kind of slide in right behind them, doing that type of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that by any means, but obviously it just kind of means that these albums are a little bit more stale sounding, less vibrant maybe than the records that Bennett was releasing, again, even just earlier in the 60s. This is an album that I talked about in my Record Store Day 2023 video, I believe. Big Red Machine, self-titled. I honestly don't think this is a great album, but hearing Aaron Dessner and Justin Vernon collaborate for a full record for the first time, it's still very interesting. It has its moments. It has its moments for sure. I still have yet to hear the full version of How Long Do You Think It's Gonna Last? I have yet to hear that album in full, although I've heard a few songs from it now. And it seems to be a little bit more all over the place than this record, which may be a good thing, may not be. Time will tell. But a very interesting project that I'm very happy to own on vinyl. I own both of their records on CD now, actually. I've got some Big Thief. UFOF. So this is the best Big Thief album that I've heard. This is from, 2019? Yep, 2019. The best Big Thief album that I've heard, but I have not yet heard Dragon New Worn Mountain, I Believe in You, which I think most people now believe is their best. So the jury is still out on that one, but this is phenomenal. I love the songwriting on here, the atmosphere. I think Adrienne Lenker is just a fantastic talent. Cattails is probably my favorite if I had to pick a single song off this album, but I think Big Thief, as far as like indie folk goes, is about as good as it gets right now. And yeah, I think Lenker could honestly split and do like a proper solo career. I know she's dropped solo projects. She probably could split from the rest of them and do just fine, but I am happy for them to continue as a collective, because I think what they're doing is great. So yeah, once I listen to Dragon New Warm Mountain, if I enjoy it as much as I assume I'm going to, I will certainly get that one on vinyl. Oh, hell yeah. Björk. Post. Uh, Not my favorite Björk album. Probably my second favorite though. Her top four. Well, no. Vespertine I think is my favorite. Pretty solidly. I just love the haunting atmosphere of that one, and also just how chill it is at times too. And I think Debut, Post, and Homogenic are all kind of in the same tier, and any one of them could slide in front of the other at any given time. But I think Post right now is my number two, just because compared to Debut, which is maybe you could argue a little bit more um, consistent sonically, this one jumps around all over the place. It jumps around all over the place, um, but also sounds really like sincere and like warm. Like Homogenic, I think it kind of starts sounding really cold and icy at that point. She kind of buries herself a little bit in like her mixes, and I think here she's still very earnest sounding. Um, and I love that. I really love that. So personal favorites on here, maybe Hyper Ballad, and I say that in part because Hyper Ballad is not the first Björk song I heard, but the first Björk song that I fell in love with. I love build-ups in music. I absolutely love build-ups, and I think that song does the kind of takes that idea of a build-up and does it perfectly. Really, really fantastic, but also so is most everything else about that record. Speaking of things that are fantastic, probably the best rock band going right now, Black Midi, Cavalcade. I have not heard their most recent album yet either, but I've heard their first two, and of those first two records, I did prefer Cavalcade, the second one. I don't know what it is about them. I think they are more willing to test boundaries than most other bands going right now, and they're also just so much better at it than other bands are right now. I think I don't know. They're a band that is hard to pin down, which is probably a cliched way of just trying to get out of explaining their music, but I genuinely don't know how, because I think they take from a lot of different ideas, and I think it's cool that they're so young. They're so invested in continuing the band. I mean, Black Country New Road, again, also one of the best rock bands going right now, but obviously in kind of an interesting position with their main singer no longer being a part of the band. So, but yeah, Cavalcade, happy to own this one on vinyl. I will certainly get Schlagenheim at some point down the line, and again, still need to check out their most recent effort as well. Back to the 70s now for a classic, Parallel Lines by Blondie. What's the best song on here? I mean, my favorite is probably the cliched Heart of Glass. I actually don't know Blondie's stuff very well, and I think even this album I've only heard once or twice. But there's something to be said for their aesthetic overall, and I don't say that just because of like Debbie Harry being one of the best front women of her era. I think they really hit that kind of new wave idea before a lot of other bands did. If not always in sound, then certainly just in terms of their vibe and how just cool they looked. And yeah, and at their peak, they were terrific. They were terrific pop rock songwriters. So nothing more to be said there, really. And back to the 60s for this one. Bloomfield Cooper Stills with Super Session. So Mike Bloomfield, Al Cooper, and Stephen Stills all on this record. Bloomfield and Stills kind of going back and forth on electric guitar. Bloomfield's on the first side, Stills is on the second side. Cooper kind of doing damn near everything else on the record, if I'm being honest. It's a fun jam album. It's a really well done jam album. It's cool to see. This is Stephen Stills on the cusp of recording the Crosby, Stills, and Nash debut record. So you really get to hear him kind of in his element. Hear him again when he is about to unleash this set of songs, which, again, if you know your history, the Crosby, Stills, and Nash debut album was recorded with mostly Stills on the instruments. And so it's really cool to kind of hear him in his element, in his groove on this record. Yeah, really, really cool stuff. I don't have a whole lot of like proper blues rock in my collection, if I'm being honest. So that's one of the closer things to that than I possess. But yeah, not much more to say, really. So, apologies for scratching my nose, by the way. It's allergy season, so we're dealing with it. Bon Iver time. I elaborate a lot more on these albums in a video I recently did on the YouTube channel Music Meltdown. So you can go there to hear more in-depth thoughts. For Emma Forever Ago from 2007. The debut album, famously recorded in a log cabin in Wisconsin. This is one of the most emotionally potent albums that I have ever listened to. Or one of the ones that has the most emotional resonance for me, particularly. Even though it is kind of a demos record. Well, it is a demos record, there's no doubt about it. It's still the combination of the atmospheric nature of these recordings with Vernon's ability as a vocalist. It makes it really powerful in a way that a lot of sad guy with acoustic guitar records don't quite match. It's a terrific album. The closing track, Regarding Stacks, probably my favorite, and maybe my favorite Bon Iver song. This one was a recent pickup. Really happy to own this now. This is Blood Bank, the EP from 2009. I think it's sort of a step forward from the debut album, and kind of a step towards what would come afterwards. Every song on here is solid enough, but I think the clear standout is Woods, the closing track. It is this a cappella, masterclass, just vocal layers adding on top of one another throughout the song. Really powerful stuff. Self-titled, Bon Iver, Bon Iver. What can be said? This is the one that got him his Grammy with the song Holocene, and it feels much more like a studio production than the self-titled or the debut record did. I love the kind of layers of electric guitars. The guitars in this album are so strong across the board. And the only downside that I would say I have to this album is just a couple of the songs that feel a little bit half-baked and not necessarily seen through to completion. And I think that stands out a little bit more in a proper studio album compared to For Emma, which is a demos album. But yeah, overall, still incredibly strong. Another album that I have a lot of memories of listening to in darker times, I suppose, to put it that way. This one I showed in my Record Store Day video. This is the 12-inch single of 22 Million and 10 Death Breasts from the album 22 a Million. The A side of the single is 22 Over Soon, not 22 a Million. So we'll be clear about that. But both great songs. So happy to have found that and to own it. Speaking of 22 a Million, as I've shown in past videos, I have it framed right behind me because it's one of my favorite albums of all time. Here is my second copy, my playing copy, if you will. Just an unbelievable album that has a lot of personal meaning for me. It is very scattered. It seems very lost in a lot of ways, but I think there's a resolution close to the end, specifically in the song Eighth Circle, which remains one of my favorite songs ever. Yeah, it's a powerful album. It's a misunderstood album, I think, by a lot of people. And I think it's been getting a little bit of a critical reevaluation in recent years, which I sincerely hope continues. I do love it very much. And I think people, if you look past some of the very over-the-top aggressive production styles, there's a lot to love with that one. I, the most recent release from 2019. It is my least favorite. I will say it has grown on me recently. It has some of the most adventurous sonic soundscapes that Bon Iver has ever worked with, and I think there's a lot of value to that just in and of itself. Yeah, Hey Ma is a great song. I think the one thing, and some people say this is a downside, I don't necessarily see it as a downside myself. You could argue it's a little bit optimistic, and that's not always what you want from Bon Iver, but I would rather, for his sake, I would rather he release an optimistic album, or they release an optimistic album, than a pessimistic one, because obviously a lot of his stuff comes from dark places mentally, and we don't want that. We don't want that out of our musicians. Boston. Next, I have two Boston albums. The debut. It's an AOR classic. It's a classic rock classic. Some of the best sounding guitars you'll find on any album ever. Some of the best sounding rock vocals you'll find on any album ever, as far as I'm concerned. I think Brad Delp was a fantastic singer. I think his death back in 2007 was very tragic. And every song on that album, I think, is genuinely great. It's really, really, really strong. But Boston are a very lightning in a bottle type of band. I think you can even see that on the second album, Don't Look Back. I think the songs here are just way less compelling. The one song on here that I think is comparable to the debut is Feelin' Satisfied. I guess A Man I'll Never Be is a kind of nice ballad. But the rest of it is just, it sounds like second-rate leftovers from the first album. The fun part about Boston, so those are the only two records I have, but my ex-roommate from college was a major fan. So not only did he have those two and Third Stage on vinyl, but he also owned Walk On from 1994 and Life, Love, and Hope from whatever fucking year it was, 2013, I think. He owned both of those on vinyl. Both of those records are very expensive and are worth quite a bit of money. Neither one is good, in my humble opinion. Life, Love, and Hope in particular is pretty cringy stuff. But, I think it's kind of a cool little thing. Like, I think both of those two albums might be more valuable than any record I own. We shall see. And then I close off here with some David Bowie. But my Bowie collection is probably not going to be what most people are expecting. Bowie, I love Bowie. I love Bowie across the board. I think he has so many great 70s albums that I have every intention of getting at some point. But the first album I actually have in my collection is Let's Dance, which is funny because this is not one of my favorite Bowie albums, although I do think it's still great and a very strong pop rock record. Or pop album, I guess. There's not a whole lot of rock in this. I think with Bowie, it's just been more of an opportunity. Like, I haven't prioritized getting his 70s albums as much, so the stuff you see here is records that maybe I felt a bit more urgency in getting for one reason or another, which we'll get to. But Let's Dance is very good. It's very good. It is probably his second best 80s album. I think definitely his second best 80s album, because I think Scary Monsters is clearly better. I think Tonight and Never Let Me Down are clearly worse. So not too hard to suppose that, I guess. This one is probably going to surprise some people, though. Black Tie, White Noise from 1993. So the next 3 albums that I have are all re-releases from the last year or so, the last 2 years. I kind of picked those up because these are all albums I've always wanted to have on vinyl, and while I'm not worried about the 70s albums still being in print, I know those things are going to be in print for as long as I live, basically. These ones I have concerns about, especially something like this, where apart from diehards, people are not going to have much interest in getting this on vinyl. But man, I don't know. I really like this album. I have no good reason for it, I suppose. It is very abrasive. It's the New Jack Swing Bowie album. And New Jack Swing aged horribly as a genre. But I think there's a lot of good songs on here. And I actually do like the production on some level, which might be a little bit weird. But what can you say? I think it's underrated. I understand why people don't like it, but I do think it is underrated compared to other Bowie albums. Speaking of underrated, 1995's One Outside, the Nathan Adler Diaries, a hypercycle. I don't think an album has ever grown on me from first listen to second listen as much as this one has. I think when I first heard it, this was a 3-star album, maybe. A light 6 out of 10. Thought it was very overblown, etc., etc. Now this thing is a 4.5, strong 8, light 9 for me. I really, really like it. I think it's really interesting for Bowie and Brian Eno to come together and work on an album like this that sounds absolutely nothing like the Berlin trilogy on any level. I think it speaks to both of their inventiveness, their respective inventiveness as artists. And even if this doesn't have the hooks necessarily, I think it does work better as a cohesive project. There's not a whole lot of songs that you can take outside the context of the record, and I understand where some people say that the project is bloated, etc., etc. I get those critiques, and yet I still love it. And again, it was another one where I was I really want this to I really want to make sure I own this on vinyl just in case it goes out of print or something. And the same is true for Earthling from 97, the drum and bass album, the jungle album by Bowie, I suppose you could say. Yeah. I would be foolish to say this is among his greatest works, because it's not, but it is infectious. And it was also, there's another Bowie album that's even more important to me just on an exposure level, but Earthling was so kind of left field when I first heard it. I was not listening to any dance music or anything like that that sounded remotely similar to this. So when I heard it for the first time, it just blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. And I've never quite recovered from that association. So even if it's obviously not his best album, I still listen to stuff like, I'm Afraid of Americans or Dead Man Walking and stuff like that, and I still just cannot get enough of it. It's fantastic. Black Star. I believe I talked about this one in the Works of Art That Mean a Lot to Me video. I remember where I was when I heard that David Bowie died. And yet I had not really listened to his music before then. I was reading the news on a Monday morning or whatever, and I saw that Bowie had died, and I was like, oh, wow. And I saw people talking about this record that he had just released, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And people were talking about the Lazarus music video, and I watched that, and I was like, holy shit, this is dark as fuck. And I don't think it was that day. I think it was later that week where I finally sat down and listened to this thing. And as someone who did not listen to much jazz before this, or much of anything, hip hop adjacent, again, sometimes like a little bit kind of drum and bass adjacent at times. I was not prepared for anything on this record, but it blew me away. It absolutely blew me away. And I'm never going to get over that experience. And so as much as I understand and acknowledge that there are Bowie albums that are more important, that are probably better constructed if you want to evaluate it in that sort of a way, this is always going to have number one in my heart. I also love that I have like this version of it. It has like the actual black star with the black record that is like clearly visible there. I think that's a really cool cover choice, which I don't know if they're doing anymore. I think they're other like more recent pressings of it. It's still just the white cover. But yeah. And then the very last thing I got was I found this thing. Did I? No, I talked about this in the video, I think. The Next Day Extra EP. Record Store Day exclusive from last year, I believe. A bunch of, not all that many, I guess, only 7 outtakes and remixes from The Next Day. I don't own The Next Day on vinyl. I do think it's a very good album. Not comparable to Black Star in my opinion, even though, at least from a quality standpoint, although I think sonically you can hear that kind of transition. But very, very, very good album. I have actually not heard any of these remakes yet, so or any of these outtakes or remixes. So TBD on what I think of this, but that is Bowie. And that is this episode for you. So really hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. More videos like this are to come. For this recording session, I'm going to give myself a break because my voice is gone. And until next time, you have a great rest of your night. And we'll see you right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive. Later now.